You don't have a lot of sales, you don't have a lot of data, you've probably been just experimenting, but you don't have true full-on traction. It is even more important to convey your belief and your conviction in what you're doing because that's what they're investing in. I'm listening, and halfway through the pitch, I'm sitting there going, why on earth is this person doing this? This seems so random. I have no idea why they're doing this. Okay, welcome back. Today we are talking about why your founder story is the pitch. Nobody cares about your TAM. You need to sell the problem, not the stats. And you really need to sell them on your problem and why this company or this product is your solution. So we're going to cover 4 things that help you tell your story. We're going to talk about why stories work, number 1, especially at the early stage. We're going to talk about the 3 elements that make a great story. So you will be able to kind of reverse engineer your story and make sure you're not skipping this part. Third thing, we're going to talk about common mistakes people make when telling their story, easy fixes. And we're going to talk about 4th, how to craft your problem story. And then at the very end, I'm going to do 2 pitches for you. I'm going to pitch my podcast, the concept, the idea. Let's imagine I didn't actually have this and I was getting ready to start it. And not that I needed investors to start it, but I'm going to pitch it in a way that's telling my story without emotion and a way that tells my story with emotion, and see if you can tell the difference. So just kind of give you an example there. So before we get into all of that, though, I want to talk about the purpose of an initial meeting with your investor and what your goal is. So I always say your goal in a meeting with an investor, potential investor, is basically to get the next meeting, right? But that is actually not true. Well, this plays a part of it, but your true goal is just to get them to know you, like you, and trust you. That is what this comes down to, especially at this very early stage. So much of it is about the human connection, and it's not about the market size and all of that. Like, people are going to back founders they know, like, and trust. That is just the truth. Hopefully you got a warm introduction. And so there's already some credibility there that somebody else knows, likes, and trusts you enough to make an introduction. But that person on the other end of who you're meeting with still themselves need to feel like they know, like, and trust you. So that is your goal. So if you put that, if you use that perspective going into the meeting, I think you're going to approach it a lot different than if you feel like your goal is to explain your company to them, right? So even on Shark Tank, if you watch Shark Tank, which I have got totally burnt out on watching that show. I haven't watched it in ages. Amazing show. Love it. Wouldn't want to do it again, but great show to watch. They very often back the founder more than the opportunity. And that's also half of what happened with me and Mark Cuban getting the deal, is because he saw I was doing the right thing. I think I was transparent on the show. I answered their questions correctly. I got my story across. And he said his wife would love my product. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who really kind of wants your product or knows somebody who has the same problem you do. So you need to share what that problem is and what your story is behind that problem. So, okay, let's start off with number 1, why stories work at the early stage. So again, investors, they are not investing in data because most likely you don't have a lot of data. You can pull some marketing stats or market stats or, whatever, but you don't have a lot of sales. You don't have a lot of data. You've probably been just experimenting, but you don't have true, full-on traction like you would once you hit, a few million in revenue. So it is even more important to convey your belief and your conviction in what you're doing because that's what they're investing in. So if you present the problem statement that is more like a textbook case study, that isn't going to move the person on the other end. So your goal is to move them. If you think about a movie that moves you, there's ups and downs and emotions and all that. And obviously, you don't want to be as long as a movie, but stories equal emotion. Emotion equals connection, and connection equals interest from the other side. Investors are human. The way you make them feel matters just as much as what you say. So the best early stage pitches aren't as much about the market or the product. They're more about your mission. And I see people miss this a lot. So it really is important. Okay, the second thing that helps you tell your story is really just understanding what makes a great story. And there are three elements, more or less, needed. I'm sure there's all kinds of people that say all kinds of things. These are the three that I think are needed to tell a great founder story. And I am not a great storyteller. I'm actually a terrible storyteller. So my husband, James, he's one of those like great storytellers. And I don't know if it's just the way my brain works, but I'm like always a few steps ahead. And I'm like, just get to the end, get to the point, get to the point. And when I tell a story, I tell the worst stories. I just basically like say what happened, and there's no real like lead up and, all this stuff. And I guess I've probably gotten better at it over the years, but I'm still just not a great storyteller. So I actually, for a pitch, I have to, make sure I'm kind of hitting things or working on that a little bit more. But the truth is that when it's your own story, it should be, and actually is, easier to tell because it's your own experience. But sometimes you need someone to pull it out of you. I've done that before where I just needed someone to kind of like help me pull my story out of my experience, my past experience. So these three things might help you just kind of refine and identify what your story is if you're skipping this part or not covering it in the right way. So the first one is the spark, right? So what happened that made this problem personal to you? So you're looking for a real moment, real pain, real people. What is the thing that sparked this, your aha, that light bulb moment? That actually is really important because it kicks off the story and the emotion. The second thing is demonstrating there's obsession. Why couldn't you let this go, right? What kept you up at night about this thing? And what made you feel like you had to solve this, right? The third thing is the vision. So what do you see that others don't? What future are you building? Why does this matter to you? Why does it matter to the world? So what is that bigger vision that you have that someone else might not see? So the story does not have to be dramatic. That is not what I'm saying. You don't want to be dramatic. You don't want to be over the top, but it has to be real and it has to have a little bit of emotion to it. So I know we're always taught like be business, no emotion is, at least for me, was like ingrained into my head. And I'm just like, screw that. People want to do business with interesting people and work with interesting people. And if you just spew off stats, like you're not going to come across that interesting at all. Okay, the third thing is common mistakes that founders make, right? So skimming the story too quickly, like it's not important. I see this all the time. Trying to sound too polished or too pitchy, then that loses authenticity. And polished doesn't mean, putting on your professional hat and being all serious. Polished just means you're confident, it flows, and it's natural, right? So polished doesn't mean like serious and rigid. It means natural and flowing and engaging. And too pitchy, I think we all know what that is. Nobody wants to be like that. Again, you're not trying to get them to write you a check then and there. Your entire goal is just to get them to know, like, and trust you in that first meeting and all the meetings throughout the whole process, really. And just with your customers, everybody, right? So that's something you should get good at anyway. So the last thing there on, common mistakes is not showing why the problem matters to you personally. Again, I see this quite a bit. People will talk about the customer's problem. But they're not talking about what this really means to them personally. So investors, they want to know why you are the one who won't quit on this thing. And I think we all know, especially, I mean, it is not an easy road, right? Again, I always say this, if you want to make money, there's easier ways to make money than founding a company. But they want to know that you have some real deep personal drive. So you really need to convey that, because that is the thing that will keep you going when the going gets rough. So, okay, the fourth thing is how to craft, your problem story. So here's what you want to start with. You want to start with that moment, real person, real story. You want to bring in your emotional reaction. You want to then explain what made you act, quit your job, start the company, you started doing the research, like what's the thing that made you act? And then you want to keep it under a minute. So it should be punchy, but it should be vivid. And then you want to practice this, but don't overscript it. So again, practice doesn't mean like businessy and formal and rigid. Practice means that you're just it naturally flows, right? So if you only have 60 seconds to make an investor care, could you tell a story that moves them? That's the real question, right? And if you're not a good storyteller, start with those things and kind of reverse engineer it. So again, if you need some inspiration, watch Shark Tank. I'd say watch my episode, but I think you have to pay to download it on Amazon or whatever. Season 5, episode 28, I think it was. And you'll see that, well, for that show, I had to be crazy, quote unquote, polished. I practiced till I was blue in the face. Polished didn't mean that I skipped over the emotional hook of my story and the thing that drove me to do what I was doing and drove me to push through, my company almost going under and losing all my production and, just all those terrible things that were brutal and not fun to go through. But I had to touch on those things and I had to really convey my why to them. But Shark Tank does a good job at that because it's national television. So those producers are working with the entrepreneurs to help them tell their story. So again, I'm totally burnt out on the show, but if you still like it and feel inspired by it, it's an amazing show. You can get some good, watch some good pitches there and see how people are telling their story. Again, I hear a lot of these pitches and I'm amazed at how many people don't start with their story. And what ends up happening is I'm listening and halfway through the pitch, I'm sitting there going, why on earth is this person doing this? This seems so random. I have no idea why they're doing this. And then they might quickly skim over it, but there's no emphasis. And I'm kind of still left thinking, I don't get why they would be doing this. This sounds, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, it is really, really important. And so break it down, really analyze how you're telling your story, where in your pitch are you telling it. I recommend it being up, maybe not the very first thing, but like at the beginning. And don't be afraid to like show some personality and emotion. Again, people trust people and like people that they know and they feel a connection with. And so if you are rigid and too businessy or just spewing out stats, that's not, a recipe for someone being super excited to support you and liking you and trusting you. So, okay, I'm going to give you 2 examples of pitching my podcast. So the first one, I'm going to give you why I do this podcast. And the second one, I'm going to give you why I do this podcast. And you can see the difference. Okay, here we go. So here's the first one. So I started Seed Money because I wanted to do a podcast, period. And there's only 10 other podcasts on air right now that cover this topic. So there's a gap in the market and I am here to fill it. So I even said that with some emotion and all that is true. But now I'm going to tell you my story as to what has kept me going, almost 2 years into this podcast and add a little bit more emotion behind it. And I'm keeping it under 60 seconds. I think I wrote this out quickly and I have not practiced it a bunch, but I just want to hopefully this will give you the idea of what the difference is. Okay, second version. I started Seed Money because when I was a founder for the first time, I always felt like an outsider. I didn't identify with the typical startup bro or VC dudes, but I knew I had what it took to launch my product and to be an entrepreneur. And I was so fortunate to get some incredible early advisors along the way. And right now there is tons of content out there from VCs, but so much of it is intimidating. And frankly, it's over a lot of people's heads, and entrepreneurship makes the world go round. I believe we need more great entrepreneurs, and I want to help those who feel like the underdog, like I did, and help them get their first break and make it happen. So from there, you can see the much deeper reason for why I'm doing this. It's both of them are explaining there's a gap in the market. Both are explaining why I want to do a podcast. Both are saying there's other content out there right now, but it's different. But one of them gets more personal, right, to the pain that I felt and the pain I see other people seeing. And again, that was under 60 seconds. I could probably shorten it up even more, but hopefully that demonstrates, like, if you're doing the first story, that's just kind of very factual and not really getting into that pain and that moment, then you want to go back and try to rework your story. Because if you are in that early stage, especially raising from high net worth angel investors, and honestly, even if you are going to VCs and angel groups, which again, warm intros only, cold DMs and emails are seriously brutal and probably not going to work very well. So if you're networking and you get a warm intro to a high net worth individual who could be an investor, your job is to connect with them and convey to them why you're doing what you're doing and get them to want to be a part of your success and a part of your journey. And that story is so important to do that. So hopefully that was helpful. If, your story's the signal, if you want investors to believe in your vision, you've got to show them why you had to start this. So if you need any feedback on your pitch, email me hello@seedmoneypodcast.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. And best of luck. Crush it. Go after it. Don't be afraid to show a little emotion and get your point across and tell them why you're doing this. It goes a long way. Okay. See you next time.